Welcome into an episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. No Alan Saunders here today, so I figured why not get the other couple guys from Steelers now. Nick Farabaugh at the top with me, Derrick Bell below us. What's going on, fellas?
What's good? What's good? What's going on? Is this the first time all three of us have been on the show?
I think it is because, as I said one time we were trying to figure out if it was me, you, and Alan on here, I preset these up on Megaphone, and I was typing in the three of our names, and it was the first time it didn't autofill. So I think this is the first time that this has happened on here. I know that we've done an episode of Around the 412 and probably done some other content together. But as far as the Steelers Afternoon Drive, I believe this is the first time that it's been the three of us. Derek, what's going on?
That's history in the making right there. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
interesting
we had the eclipse today. So,
yeah,
you don't see this every day either.
This is way more important, though, than the eclipse, man. Like, definitely Steelers Afternoon Drive, way more important. No, I'm excited, man. It's just, trying to grind out these last couple, weeks before the NFL draft. A lot to talk about. Get into some of these prospects.
Derek, a position that we haven't spent a lot of time talking on, your story just came out on Steelers Now today, is defensive tackles. But I think, when you look at the state of the Steelers defensive line, obviously a really nice piece for now and the future in Keanu Benton. But then you got a lot of long-term question marks. Cam Hayward, who knows what the future holds for him beyond this season. Larry Ogunjobi got a new 3-year deal prior to last year. I don't want to say somehow got a new 3-year deal after the 1-year contract that he originally signed, but for lack of better words, somehow got a 3-year extension in Pittsburgh. Good player, but I don't think necessarily warranted that contract. The injury concerns, I don't think he's necessarily lived up to that. Then you got pieces like Isaiah Loudermilk, DeMarvin Leal, et cetera, et cetera. So they brought Fehoko back. Monty Adams, good player as well. But, I think that there certainly is the need if somebody, a really good player, were to fall. But it's kind of hard when you look at their other needs to pinpoint where exactly they could look to add some defensive line depth. So you put out a story, and I figured that's where we should start because, again, it's a position that we haven't necessarily had a lot of conversation about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the dominating headlines over the past couple weeks just been, the Steelers are going into the draft, potentially with, glaring needs at center and wide receiver. We've talked at, ad nauseum really about the options there, but this is a really talented interior defensive line class as well. Nick, I'm really curious on what your thoughts are on that class, positional group wise, but there's a couple dudes in this class, man, that I think are just fantastic prospects. And honestly, I'm just really confused. I know it's a offensive heavy draft, especially early in the first round where a lot of players are getting buzz on that side of the ball. But, Johnny Newton from Illinois, who the Steelers haven't really done a ton of work on throughout the process, and Byron Murphy from Texas, two absolutely dominant prospects. We just don't see pass rushers on the interior come out this well-developed and athletic every single cycle. And I think that you look around the NFL and, the cycle of all these different interior rushers getting bags in free agency. That's the new move, right? Over the past, 12 months or so, we've seen all these interior rushers get absolutely paid. And it's really important. Teams are looking for these guys that can win inside and, disrupt the quarterback. And I think Newton, I'm probably higher on him than almost anybody. I think should be in the conversation to be the first defensive player on the board. That's how much I like him. But I like Byron Murphy a lot too. Easily top 20 prospects. The Steelers did have a formal meeting with Murphy at the combine, but two really good prospects. Nick, I'm interested to hear your thoughts, kind of on the interior D line.
I felt like when I came into the process, where I started a little later before the Senior Bowl, I heard that it was kind of a weaker D-line class, and then I started jumping into watching it, and I don't really see it. You talk about the top two, who I think are fantastic. I think Johnny Newton legitimately has an argument to be the best defensive player in the class. I think I loved his tape when I watched it. Murphy's very good too. Those two are not being talked about in the same light as they should be. But even the day two guys, there's a lot of options, like Braden Fiskey, Arororo, Michael Hall. There's so many guys that I can run down the list of, depending on where you put Robinson, consider him Dorless, all these guys that we're talking about. It's a lot of guys. And then even going further back, even on day three, or late day two, I like the potential of guys like Mason Smith and, Christian Boyd, I think, is one of my favorite under the radar players in this class. It's not an elite D-line class, but It's a pretty solid one. I think it's a good one. If you need a D lineman, I think you'll be able to find one. So I really like this, and the top guys are not getting the love that they should be. I think either they're going to go much earlier than everyone anticipates, or some team later is going to get an absolute heist of a deal. I've been doing some of these mock draft sims, and Newton or Murphy sometimes are there 20, and like
Ridiculous.
BPA, they are probably honestly the BPA there. Like they are
Yeah.
that good. It depends on what tackle falls. Sometimes you get like a wild Fautanu 20 or something but like D line to me is a very nice class. The Steelers aren't, I don't think, in the market for Newton or Murphy. But we're talking about Arroyo, um, even Boyd, Logan Lee came in. Logan Lee's an interesting player too. Like I know he's bit kind of unhyped right now, but had a good week at the Shrine Bowl when I was down there, and I really liked his kind of makeup. And then you talk about Mason Smith and different guys like that Fiskey. There's just a lot of guys in this class where you can peg them, and I like the different skill sets that they all have. So you need a run stopper, you could find one. You need a guy with more pass rush upside, you could find one. So I like that fact. So it's a good class. I think the Steelers are rightfully looking hard at it and rightfully going to dip into this at some point, probably on day 2.
I know we talk a lot about prospects, not on the air or anything like that, but y'all both know that I don't do a ton of comps very often, just because like I feel like they just get so overused and forced in this time of year. But like, there's one comp that I feel really, really strong about. It's that I think Johnny Newton's Geno Atkins reincarnated. I think he's that type of player. Like, I am scared to death that he's going to end up in Cincinnati, and I'm going to have an absolute meltdown on YouTube that night because I will be livid. I just think he's a fantastic prospect. You mentioned Braden Fisk from Florida State. I didn't get to his tape until a couple weeks ago. I went back and watched a little bit more earlier this morning as well, actually, before I wrote that piece. And his tape is totally unhinged, man. Like, he has no clue what he's doing, but he plays 500 miles an hour at all times, and he just throws his body around. He's extremely athletic. The motor, like, he doesn't look like the prototypical, Steelers defensive lineman the way like a Mason Smith from LSU does, or even Rukaroro does from Clemson. But Fisk, like, you talk about, like, we've always watched, Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt run guys down 20, 30 yards from the line of scrimmage with those hustle plays. He does that every single play. I don't know how he's in that good a shape because he plays balls to the wall nonstop. And it's honestly like, it's jaw dropping that a guy almost 300 pounds can play like that. But I think the athletic upside there, if you can just get, I would say, average play against the run, he will get moved in the run game, but a really fun player. And I'm really interested to see where he ends up, whether it be Pittsburgh. He does have a top 30 reported visit with them or elsewhere, but I think he's a fun player to watch.
Kind of interesting Keanu Benton parallels with his tape too. Remember the Wisconsin tape that Benton played? I didn't feel like Benton had a clue what he was doing half the time either. He was just unhinged and was making plays. And clearly that kind of came along. You can, I like the Steelers' approach to the defensive line because they have visions for guys and they like to mold these balls of clay that are very talented and have natural gifts like Fisk does, who is just an absolute monster athlete. Explosive off the snap, goes 120 miles per hour. He's a perfect type of guy and the perfect type of player they need too, right? They don't need, another big nose plugger. They kind of have different things there. What they need is another guy that can get out there as a 3 or a 5, which is also why they've kind of shown interest in some of these tweeners like Darius Robinson. So I'm interested to see where they kind of go with that. But Fisk fits their mold. Mason Smith is also just like a perfect Steelers. You put his physical traits up against a guy like Stephon Tuitt, and it is very similar in terms of physical build. So when Keanu Benton came out last year, the first thing I said was, dude, he looks like the Hulk. Like, he looks like a star defensive lineman would look like when he's on the all bust team, but then you pull on the tape and you saw the flashes. And Carl Dunbar, in my opinion, is one of the best defensive line coaches in the game.
Yeah,
I
I
still
agree.
believe that he has developed guys consistently throughout his tenure, both at Alabama and in Pittsburgh. And so I really look at this and say, man, there's a lot of guys you could really elevate to the next level. A guy like Smith, a guy like Fisk, I think really fits it, but I think it's still, if you're looking for value, a guy like Fisk in round 2 or a guy like Smith, maybe a 98, I'd probably go with Smith in that case. But another guy we haven't even mentioned is Chris Jenkins. Like I don't know why he's not getting more love in this class. I really like Chris Jenkins' tape. A guy that comes from NFL bloodlines. Steelers love that. We're at Michigan Pro Day. Like, would not surprise me at all if they're really interested in him. He's another guy that just plays incredibly fast, all over the place. Incredible strength and just power that he plays with. And he's about, he's a little maybe undersized for a normal Steelers D line. It's about what, 6'2", 300.
Mhm.
But he's a really fun player too. So there's a lot of fun players in this day 2 pool.
Part of what you said there was kind of answering my question, because I was just saying, I think so Steelers fans watching or listening to this, which I would presume pretty much anybody that is watching or listening to this is a Steelers fan. The question that's going to pop in their mind is, who are the best fits for the Steelers? When would you kind of expect them to take that swing? Nick, you mentioned in there maybe as early as round 2 with the Braden Fiske. Like, is that kind of a sweet spot you think for them, or would it be lower on the board? And who are like your favorite fits specifically for the Steelers?
I mean, I think round 2 is the start of their range.
Okay.
Is that where a Roro's gonna probably go, probably somewhere there. Fisk is probably gonna go somewhere between their second and third pick. Um, Maybe this is where we talk about trade back scenarios from
Mm,
20, where you
yeah.
acquire that extra second day pick and you have that extra pick to use. I think that's interesting. Jenkins is probably in there too, but when you start to get to round 3, you're probably talking about Smith, Hall. I think might be there. Don't really have a feel for where Chris Jenkins is going to fall on the board. I think he's going to be a day 2 pick. I just don't know if that's going to be early or later. If he's there at 84, to me, that has to be the pick. I just think he's a great value fit there. I think he fits what they need too. And a guy like Smith at 98. I mean, we haven't even talked about, Dwayne Carter, who has some really nice tape at Duke and had a great Senior Bowl. I mean, this is a really deep class. On day 3, you have guys like Gabe Hall that are pretty interesting, had a great Senior Bowl from Baylor. You have Tyler Davis has some interesting tape on
Hmm.
his resume. Jawan Briggs, I thought had a really nice Shrine Bowl too from Cincinnati. Just a really deep group. But I think, I would be looking for personally a 3 tech that could maybe play 5. Depends, but I would look for a guy that has more pass rush upside, just because I don't think they have fully replaced what Armin Watts brought. And I also think that
Yeah.
they need more pass rush upside in that rotation, because right now, really the only guy with significant pass rush upside that's in the rotation or has that pass rush upside to me is Monty Adams, but that's
Yeah.
still not ideal.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned I was naming basically all the defensive linemen on the roster. They did bring in Dean Lowry as well. I don't think that is a one-for-one trade-off with what Armin Watts brought by any means. I would
Different.
much rather have Armin Watts here, but Dean Lowry is, added depth there. But Derrick, your opinion on that? Like, where would you think is kind of like a sweet spot for them? Who are some of your favorite fits specifically for the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the motivation behind writing that piece was, just to kind of, because the conversation has been steered away from the defensive line the entire, cycle, just because, like I said, the
Hmm.
Steelers have other needs. And because of those other needs as it stands right now, it's difficult to say that they'll take one in the first, couple rounds, just because,
Yeah,
like I said, as of right now, they couldn't field an offense. Right. Like they don't have a center. They don't have a wide receiver 2 or probably a wide receiver 3. And it's just difficult to, even though like the Steelers are, bringing back their starters, like you mentioned earlier, the long-term, picture for the defensive line is pretty murky right now. Cam Hayward's going to be, 35 entering the last season of his contract. I mean, they're going to need to see a significant spike in production in Larry Ogunjobi to really warrant his type of cap hit. He's got the 5th highest cap hit this season on the roster. So I think, finding a running mate on the defensive line for Benton, somebody that has some pass rush upside, would definitely be, the move. I think, probably the most likely scenario, though, is probably someone in the middle rounds in the 3rd, 4th, 5th range, Mason Smith. looks like a Steeler, has, checks the boxes in terms of like height, weight, length.
Mhm.
He's got some interesting tools. He does flash as a pass rusher, can lock out with his long arms against the run. Only thing I think there is like I don't see the motor that the Steelers typically look for in their defensive linemen. Like I think I see like a guy that takes some plays off, a little bit inconsistent, and he was recovering last year too from an ACL tear the year prior, and I just felt like he was playing really tall and wasn't able to really leverage his lower body flexibility the way he was. Before he got hurt when he was a freshman, because I mean, this dude was a highly touted recruit, a guy that a lot of people were really excited about just a couple of years ago. But I think Chris Jenkins probably in the mix there. We talked a little bit about Christian Boyd from Northern Iowa. Nick, you got to see him at the Shrine. I definitely think if you're talking about Boyd's an interesting player because he looks like a defensive tackle, but he plays like a three tech. So I don't really know exactly what the best spot for him is going to be. But I look at the way that he moves. He has a really quick first step. I look at him being a part of like he's a rotational player at the next level, in my opinion. And that again gives you somebody else kind of to add in the mix and just see if you can develop him, give him to Carl Dunbar and see what happens. But Zach, I'm curious on like your thoughts. Like, do you think that should we be talking about defensive line more than we are right now in terms of like, we'll just say day 2, like first rounds, probably, even though I love Newton and Murphy, would be thrilled to have either one of them at 20. Do you feel like we should be talking about, defensive line more in the second and third round, especially if they get more picks?
If they get more picks, yeah, and it's not to say that it's not a need. I just think that everything else is so much more pressing. So I get why it's kind of been pushed to the back burner in conversation, like is in terms of addressing it relatively early within the first few rounds for guys that you expect to contribute immediately. Like, sure, they definitely need a long-term piece, and I'm on board. Like, yeah, if the best player available on the board is a defensive tackle, by all means take them, because I think the need is certainly there for, like I said, a running mate long term for Keanu Benton. But the fact that like the center situation is the way that it is, the tackle situation, wide receiver, corner, I completely get why defensive tackle is kind of flown under the radar in conversation.
But their interest is not. I mean, 5
Right.
pre-draft visits at the defensive line. I think it's pretty clear that we could see this go probably round 3. I think that's where the sweet spot is. But again, they've shown interest in Fisk. They've shown interest. Carl Dunbar went to LSU Pro Day along with Andy Waddle. That to me points to Mason Smith being the likely pick. I think that's what they're going to like. Pedigree, freak athleticism, great build. The last 4 games of his tape last year were awesome. I think he started to really hit his stride. Mason Smith was a guy that was thought of as a potential first-round pick before the injury.
Mm-hmm.
There's similar parallels to his draft stock to DeMarvin Leal when he was coming out of A&M. I think the difference is Smith is very easily projectable into a role. When they brought Leal on, they have never really known what to do with him. And that's really been the uncork of DeMarvin Leal here. And so Mason Smith, 5 tech, can switch into 3 and sub. Really, really long, great athlete. If he can develop into even half the player his potential is, he's a starter at this level. And so he's a very interesting player and the very type of Steelersy guy because of the build, the athleticism, as Mike Tomlin likes to say, doesn't run from coaching, so he gets the rare athletic traits. So he makes a lot of sense to me as the pick at 98, I think, or 84, depending on where they kind of value him at on the board. But listen, I could see it at 51, if they really love a guy. But I still think 51 is probably going to be receiver center more than likely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think too,
Okay.
like we talked a little bit, or I hinted about it just a minute ago, but I know it's the common thing with how, widespread these mock draft simulators are, and everybody's always loving to spark these things up and trade up and down the board. But in years past, I've always kind of like rolled my eyes when people are sending me all these mock drafts where it has the Steelers making multiple trades, because I'm like, that just never happens. But last year we did see Omar Khan trade up in the first round. He traded back on day 2, kind of moved around the board a little bit. I keep telling people like this just may be his thing. Like, he may be a more aggressive general manager on draft weekend in terms of manipulating the board. And I hope that
Yeah.
depending on who falls, I mean, if a guy like Amarius Mims were to fall to 20, I made a video on him on my channel today. If he falls to 20, like it's hard for me to imagine them passing him up in that scenario. But depending on what the board looks like, I would really like for the Steelers to be able to trade back 5, 6, 7 spots and get one of those, get another premier pick, get another day 2 pick to the mix, and just because I think then you can start opening up more possibilities in terms of, all right, you trade down to the mid to late 20s, take the best player available there. And then, we talk about like it's going to be difficult for them to walk out of the draft weekend and feel like most of their premier needs. We already talked about center, we talked about receiver. But I mean, there's some other spots where I definitely think you'd like to upgrade. I think they'd like to upgrade at corner. Obviously, offensive tackle, they've shown a lot of interest there. I think that that's still a very likely scenario in round one. But then there's other depth needs too, like where you're planning more so for the future, which is like defensive line. I think they're probably going to take a linebacker at some point too, whether that's, in the third, fourth, fifth round. But you get more draft ammo, more capital, and you can start trying to fill out the rest of the roster. So, I mean, a trade back scenario makes more sense this year for me than it has ever probably.
I still
Sure.
think also post-draft free agency is going to be big for them. Shannon Sullivan was signed on day 3 last year, brought in Quan during training camp, brought in Marcus Golden during OTAs. So whatever they think is weaker, they think receivers a little weak. Maybe that's Tyler Boyd coming in. They don't love tackle, and they didn't get a tackle. There's still a few guys out there. Mekhi Becton. Donovan Smith is still out there. Like they could theoretically bring these guys in. Center is like the one position that is like you got to do it through the draft. There's
It's
just
got to happen. Yeah.
it's got to, right? The only guy that you feel like could really be out there and be a comfortable starter where you're like I don't want to upgrade is Connor Williams, but what's the recovery timeline with Connor Williams? We don't know that.
Yeah.
So center needs to happen through the draft, but everything else, if you don't get a linebacker, you can sign a linebacker. You don't get a defensive lineman, even still, there's enough depth out there, or trade for a guy later. Like you can make moves post draft. Slot corner is definitely probably the position that seems likeliest to get just passed on if nothing's there that they like, because they have Shannon Sullivan and Pat Pete still on the market and could easily call one of them up and say, just play slot for us this year. So we'll see kind of how it shakes out. But, if they don't trade back, that post-draft free agency is going to become very big. I still expect a few significant moves that'll be in the rotation in the post-draft free agency process.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it takes 2 to tango, but I'm in full agreement with Derek about trading back. I mean, that would be a way that we keep talking about. There's probably like one box as of right now that they're not going to be able to check as of right now with the draft picks that they have and the needs that they have. And what is going to be that one that they don't check if this is the amount of draft picks that they go in with? If they do trade back, get another day 2 pick, that is a way that you can check an additional box. So that would just give them the ammo to be able to do that. But yeah, I want to kind of bring in another idea, or another topic, and we can kind of marry all the things together. AD Mitchell coming in for a top 30. We've talked a lot about receivers, and also Troy. Well, Nick, you already talked about the idea of Troy Fautanu coming in for a top 30. We knew that was going to happen. But those 2 guys both going to be coming in this week for top 30 visits. Wide receiver, tackle, we've talked a lot about those 2 positions, but again, just adding to the known interest that they have in those 2 positions.
It's interesting because I've long thought that center in round 1 didn't line up with what Omar Khan typically preaches, because he has 2 philosophies, and I think some of it's Andy Weidel, who worked with Howie Roseman, because I think there's a lot of parallels between what Khan, Weidel do to what Howie Roseman does, moving around the board. Bigs are very important to them. They pay bigs and all this. He basically likes premium positions at good value. And if you're non-premium, you better be either a star, which is a premium player like a Patrick Queen or a Minka Fitzpatrick, or they maximize value there. Like, for example, they sat at 80 last year, traded back, and still got Darnell Washington, right? Like, tight end's not a premium position unless that guy's a star. So that's what I kind of view this first round pick as, is look at who they're interested in: wide receivers, corners, tackles. That first round pick is a BPA premium position of need, which are all three of those. That to me is where they're going to kind of go. Trade back makes sense if they don't love anyone there, but I also look at the board, and if they trade back, let's just say to 27 or 28 with Arizona or Buffalo, who I think makes sense, who's going to be there? You could have a corner like Kool-Aid there, a corner like Cooper DeJean there, someone like that. Receiver, A.D. Mitchell might be there. Tackle, do they like Tyler Guyton, or do they like Kingsley Suamatea from BYU, someone like that, Jordan Morgan, around that? Or trade back could be the move to get a center. Like that could be what they do. They trade out of 20, trade back 7 or 8 spots, take Jackson Powers Johnson, Graham Barton, or I don't think Zach Frazier's in that discussion that early, but I think one of those two would be. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. It's either the best player available at a premium position at 20, or you trade back and try to maximize value, which I think then opens up center maybe to being the pick.
I feel like I'm constantly gonna be tweeting out that like meme where he's got the guy's got the piece of paper and he's like, it's like AD Mitchell no matter what. Like that's pretty much what I'm gonna like make my profile picture over the next couple of weeks. Like I just I'm so unbelievably not surprised that the Steelers have heavy interest in him because he's the most Steelers receiver of all time. But I think the kid is so freaking good, and I think that he would be awesome to see work next to George Pickens. I'm just not sure. Like I think he's going in the first round, and I'm not sure that they would take him at 20. Like I said, I kind of lean tackle if all things are the same, and they have a relatively the same grade on a tackle or a receiver, I think they would go tackle. Kind of like the philosophy that Nick mentioned. They've talked a lot about winning through their bigs. Even though Mitchell is a big receiver, I think they definitely mean offensive line in that scenario. But the pre-draft visit, man, it makes so much sense to me. Mitchell's an awesome prospect. I mean, I know I've talked on here on the afternoon drive about him. I've talked on YouTube, Twitter. I've screamed it really from the rooftops. Over the past, I guess like 4 or 5 months now that I'm a big believer in his talent. I would love to see, Mike Tomlin. You talked a little bit earlier about, him not running from coaching. I think that Pittsburgh would be the ultimate landing spot for him, like in terms of being able to reach his potential. Tomlin seems to get the most out of these types of guys. And I would be really enthusiastic about, him being the pick, especially if you could trade back a couple spots. I know a lot of people seem to be mocking him in the late 20s now. If you could trade back a couple spots and acquire more capital and do so, man, that would be home run, grand slam type selection for me.
He's a good player, man. I mean, great route runner, very flexible for his size. I like him better than Brian Thomas personally. I think Thomas has the
I
physical.
think all three of us do, to be honest.
Yeah,
dude. Brian
not
Thomas,
a hot take on this particular podcast. Not a hot take, but I appreciate.
Listen, I like Brian Thomas, but he's pretty raw still. I think that is something, but he's got rare physical traits. Obviously, at 6'4", running what he does. But dude, A.D. Mitchell. I think I'm a little worried about A.D. Mitchell just because he doesn't try on some plays, or at least it looks like he takes off. That's why he's a very Steelers receiver. Like he's gonna have some things that probably will make certain fans pull their hair out. I 100% believe that, but he's
Zach Azani in town now, though.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think I'm another receiver, and I think I'm the only one who's peddled this in Pittsburgh. Another receiver, if they trade back, I would at least like to see them put in consideration is Troy Franklin. I love his tape. Like I told Smitty this right now, like he's my wide receiver 4 or 5. I love Troy Franklin. Like I love the guy's tape. It's dynamite. I watched over 2 years of his tape, and I just thought he pops. I think he's really an underrated route runner. I thought you saw his hands catching ability more in 22 than 23. He became more of a clutcher and a body catcher. So would like to see him kind of dispel that, but I think he's got special acceleration and go. So I really like his tape too. But we're talking A.D. Mitchell coming in here, man. That's a Steelers pick in the first round if I've ever seen one for a receiver. He's definitely the likeliest receiver to me for them if they're taking round one.
Yeah,
would not.
I mean, imagine in Derrick's scenario though, where if they're able to trade back get him and then get another day 2 pick. I mean, I think that is a scenario where you do see the receiver because as of right now, I don't see them going receiver in round 1. But then if they're able to pick up another day 2 pick in the process of doing so, I think that's where the conversation could be them saying, "Okay, we are comfortable doing this."
I think AD Mitchell's draft stock's interesting because I know he's being mocked in the late 20s, but I think Brian Thomas is being mocked a little too late right now. Like, I don't think Thomas is going to be there 20. I don't think he'll be there. So if he's not there, the next guy that's probably naturally going to be off the board is Mitchell. And so I've long thought, when you look at like the next 4 teams after the Steelers, it's what the Dolphins, the Eagles, the Vikings right now are at 23. And then but the Packers are 25. I can't remember who 24 is.
Cowboys.
Yeah, Cowboys. So all of these teams have like overlapping needs with the Steelers. Like Cowboys need a tackle and a center. Vikings, if they don't use that pick to trade up eventually for a quarterback, need a corner. Like you look at the Dolphins need a tackle, could take a receiver still, even if they're going to be sickos about it. Eagles could take a tackle, could take a corner. But none of those teams really feel like receiver teams. So I don't really look at Mitchell coming off the board to be much of a threat, but the Bills coming up would be the threat. And so I don't really know where AD Mitchell's stock is. I know he's
Well, that's the thing is we're talking about trade back. What if it is to the Bills and it's the Bills that take AD Mitchell? Like that's why they are coming up.
I mean, at that point, man, if they come up at 20 and take AD Mitchell, I mean, that's gonna help someone else fall too, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it just depends at that point what you're kind of doing. So I don't know.
I have a take though, by the way.
Yes, what's your take?
This is a prediction for what's going to happen on draft night. AD Mitchell's not going to be the first Texas receiver taken.
I could see it. Some team
I
falling
think
in love
somebody
with
takes a chance on the. Yep.
Very Cardinals pick. 27th overall.
Hollywood replacement.
Yeah, I could see it.
I like it. The other guy that I mentioned, Troy Fautanu, I want to talk about him because we've obviously talked about him a little bit as a guard, and then the way that he kind of measured and stuff. It's like, okay, maybe he can stay at tackle. But a position that we have not talked about him playing at all is center. The Steelers clearly have a need at center. Is that something that we should be considering at all? Or like if they took him, would it specifically to play tackle? Or would it surprise you if they kind of tried to tap into any versatility?
I would just like to see if he could do it because I really, when I watch the dude and the way that he moves, I think he absolutely could. I don't know that he's ever done it in his college career because I'm pretty sure he's just been on the left side. But he's an excellent player, man. I don't really know where I like him the best. I am somewhat cautiously optimistic that he could, play at tackle. I mean, he does have 34.5-inch arms, and he's a really good technician too. So he's already a guy that I honestly need to go back and watch a little bit more because I wrote a piece up on him before the college football playoffs. But he's a really good player. I was more optimistic about his ability to stay outside than I was with a guy like Fuaga. But in terms of athleticism, strength, like I said, he's already got pretty good technique. He would be a guy that I would be interested in at pick 20. I think they definitely would be too. He is a West Coast guy though, so I mean, it would be kind of surprising that that'd be the first West Coast guy that they would have taken in a really, really long time. But
it's just nice to know that they realize he exists. Like,
yeah,
that's just nice to know.
Like that side of the country is,
yeah,
that also has
there's football.
NFL draft
There's football
prospects.
played over here.
Yeah. But I mean, they were. I think they had some involvement at their pro day as well. So it's not really surprising. I mean, they're casting a wide net. I mean, we talk like Fautanu, Fuaga, Mims. I mean, all three of those guys are wildly different kind of archetype players. But the tackle definitely seems like it's the most likely scenario in round one, in my opinion.
Makes sense. Listen, I also think the thing with Fautanu is, okay, maybe he's decent but not great in year one. James Daniels' contract is up next year. I mean, if you wanted to, year two, you could slide him inside. That could happen. You could slide him inside the guard if you didn't like him. But I think he should be given the chance to fail at tackle. Now, if they draft him, I'm interested to see where they would play him and if they would, flip him to right, because I think they probably would, just based on Omar's comments wanting to get Broderick back to left. So my guess is you would want the young player that kind of is coming in to train at that other spot. I think Fautanu can do it. It's just, he's a natural left tackle. He is a natural left tackle. So just something to consider if you're really on that train. But I largely think for the most part, unless, Fautanu falls or something, which has weirdly happened. They've been mocked Fautanu like 3 times in the past week. Not sure what's going on there. Makes no sense to me. If that happens, they should run the card in as fast as they possibly can, because that is like the best pick they can get.
Yeah, Broderick's not going to left tackle if Ashana is there.
No,
this is
Broderick
not
ready
happening.
to permanently learn right tackle. But,
yeah, he's not. He would not move back in that scenario.
Like, Fautanu, to me, it would make sense because you would want him to learn the right side, because he would be probably a right guard if James Daniels walks. And I don't know if James Daniels is going to walk. I think he's the likeliest candidate to get an extension this offseason, but we saw the guard market absolutely explode. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but I think Fautanu gives some interesting versatility in that regard, because he can play probably all 5 spots. Again, he didn't really do any center stuff, so I think he can play there, but didn't do it. That's why I was a little bummed out he didn't go to the Senior Bowl. I think we could have seen a little bit of center reps there, but I think Fautanu, slots in at one of the tackle spots if you draft him. He's a good player, and I think you really like what he brings, because he's athletic, good scheme fit, really steady guy. I was surprised at the 34.5-inch arm measurement that he had at the combine. Very pleasant surprise for the Steelers. That fits their threshold. So he'd be a really nice player to add, and really good value at 20. He's probably OT 4 or 5, wherever you have him on that threshold, but still a very good player and top 20 player in my opinion. So really like what he brings to the table.
Like Derrick, I just want to see if he can play center, because I was just reading some of his background here, everything that he played in high school. This dude was playing volleyball too, just an unreal athlete. So like, I'm just curious, how far we can stretch this and see what we can do.
I mean, you watch the dude play. I mean,
Yeah,
he's a very unique mover for the position. I mean, just the way that he gets out of his stance, the lateral mobility. I think he's, like Nick said, a good scheme fit for what they want to do with the outside zone stuff. I'm cool with letting him play left tackle. I mean, transitioning him to right would also be something I think that they would at least look at. In OTAs, mini camp, try to get the best, group out there. I'm very curious on, anytime somebody's got that type of athleticism, I would be very curious about getting him to the pivot, because, while the center position isn't considered a premier spot, I do think that if you can get a extremely good athlete at the center position, it opens up a lot of stuff that you can do in the run game. And you look at some of the guys that have played center for Arthur Smith, particularly, Drew Dahlman, guy last year for Atlanta. That dude, an absolute freaky athlete at the pivot. And, to do the wide zone stuff, it helps if you got a guy that can, perform those reach blocks. And Fautanu, nope, there will be no problem with that on his side. So very interesting player. I think he'll definitely be somebody that we'll be talking about a lot, as the draft keeps, chugging along here.
There we have it. All right, guys. Great conversation today. As always, tell the people where they could find you. Since Derek, since you're at the bottom there, not that this is indicative of the pecking order or anything like that, but go ahead and tell the people where they can find you.
No, it's cool, man. I'm a bench player on the Steelers afternoon drive. I accept my role, and it is what it is.
Next man of the year.
Yeah, at Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube. You can find all my written work. Like I said, posted a piece on the interior defensive line today on Steelers Now. Y'all can go check that out too.
Man, if you guys are subscribed to Derek's YouTube channel, those thumbnails have been great. I don't know who's doing them for you, but those thumbnails have been awesome recently.
A hired gun.
There we go. And Nick, tell the people they can find you.
Yeah. Follow me on X, Twitter at Farabaugh FB. Read more stuff at Steelers Now. We're pumping out more draft content, all of that stuff, covering stuff. Dropped my 5 thoughts this weekend on the draft that I thought were pretty pertinent. Talked about trading back, premium position, what the plan is at center, double dip at receiver that I think's coming. All that stuff is in there.
2 weeks from Thursday, night 1 of the 2024 NFL Draft. It will be here before we know it. The month of April is nuts, and it's going to fly by. So there we have it. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here so you guys don't miss any of the content. Comment down below with your thoughts on anything that we talked about today, how you think things are going to shake out. Your thoughts on the defensive tackle class. Again, not a position that we've talked about a bunch, but we probably should be. So let us know what you're feeling there. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff as well on the listening platforms. There's a 5-star review if you are over there, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. Be sure to do that as well. For Zachary Smith, PGH, for Nick Farabaugh, for Derrick Bell, we'll see you next time on Steelers Afternoon Drive.